for the first time since 2017, there's an updated real estate purchase contract. So joining me now is Scott Drucker, General Counsel and Assistant CEO of Arizona Realtors. Thank you very much for joining us. We know it's a hot market out there. Was this update necessary?
It is, because the Phoenix real estate market is always evolving, as is the market throughout the whole state, and technology within homes, and that's associated with real property changes. So we need to make sure that everything's addressed in our contracts and keeping it up to date.
And there were three major updates, and one of them had to do with smart devices. Of course, back in 2017, we didn't see a lot of like the Ring doorbells or the Nest thermostats.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example of technology that you find in a home now, and it's important that it's addressed in the contract so we make sure that those items convey to the buyer. They remain with the home, but also the buyer needs to have access to them, right? Sometimes that's usernames, passwords, or access to an online app. So all of that should be addressed in the contract.
And also required now, the seller has to inform the buyer of how to use it and how to properly operate it.
Sure. What good is it, right, if you don't have access to it and you can't use it?
Okay. Talk about the concessions, because this has changed as well. And for those who aren't familiar with concessions, what are they?
Sure. So seller concessions is money that the seller pays to help the buyer with the costs that they experience. And typically those are costs that are paid at close of escrow. Escrow costs, recording fees, things of that nature. And we expanded the definition of seller concessions so that the money that the seller is paying, the buyer can use it for more items.
And this is something they have to agree upon in the first place.
Yeah, exactly right. Both parties have to are going to be in the contract, and then we want the buyer to be able to use the money.
The last thing is solar, and this is important here in the state of Arizona.
Yeah, we have a lot of sun and a lot of solar, and a lot of homes have solar systems that are associated with them, but not all solar systems are owned outright by the seller. A lot of times they're leased. So we need to make sure that that buyer is able to assume the solar lease in conjunction with their purchase of the home.
All these updates, I mean, it goes back to the seller and the buyer. It just is makes the documentation ironclad so that they're not fighting back and forth, but it's still, you know, business as usual.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to hire a realtor so that you have access to these forms, because these forms are designated for use by Arizona Realtors, and the forms are tested. They've been used hundreds of thousands of times. They're fair, and they include provisions that make sense, and that aren't confusing, and that are enforceable, which is most important.
Last question.
Yeah.
How's the market right now?
It's hot. It's competitive, right? Inventory is low, so it's a very hot and competitive market.
And a seller's market.
Yeah, no question.
All right, if you're on the fence and thinking about selling, this might be your time. Thank you very much for taking the time and informing us about what these new changes mean.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.